Hey everybody, Rob Mullins here, and today I'm here to talk to you about this book that I wrote, Jazz Piano Voicings. Yes, it is on Hal Leonard Publishing, and you can pick it up if you just drop by my website, go to planetmullins.com/book.htm. And what we're going to do is we're going to work with just some of the ideas that are in the front part of the book, and I'm going to explain how these chord voicings came about and how the notation works and all of that good kind of stuff. So first, what I got to do is I got to get my screen share going. I have a app that's new to me called Cordy that I'm going to use, which is a fantastic program. It's really cool. I just picked it up last night in order to make this video, and it's got some super cool analytical tools in there. And I was messing around with a little bit. And this, Lullaby Birdland. I mean, this is really fantastic for a guy like me because I love the fact that I don't have to sit and type all this stuff into a notation program. That can be so tedious, and this is just a whole lot quicker as far as explanatory information. I love it. So, all right, what you're going to need to excuse me, a little bit of a cold, to participate in this is you need to go to my website and download the worksheet. And the worksheet is at planetmullins.com/cci.pdf. And for those of you that do already have this book, it is page 5 that we're going to be working with, which is the C chords voicing index. Okay, so getting right to the point here, Cordy's use of standardization of chord notation and chord symbols is one of the best things about the app, because if you're a person who regularly plays jazz, you've probably seen, just fake book charts and sheet music where there'll be a chord symbol there, and it could be just the letter C, and that could be interpreted so many ways. If you've worked in Finale or Sibelius, there's this huge myriad of things that come up when you're thinking about a C chord. And until this app came along, there were just too many ways to try and write something down. C major 7, here's this chord, or here's a C major 9. Well, a lot of times a C major 9 is going to be written that way in a book because the melody note is on a 9, but it might not be in the chord. And it just gets more complicated and further goes down the rabbit hole. So anyway, the thing about jazz chords and about my book in particular is that when trying to put this together on the grand staff, the traditional notation for piano music, it got to be really challenging. And you can see up there in the voicing chord index under C major 7 position 1, there's a whole bunch of notes in the treble clef that are way below the staff, and it's hard to read that stuff. But the only way I could, have it make sense to show that there's a bass note happening first and then a chord on top of it was to notate it in this fashion. So I know it's not perfect, but the grand staff is not perfect either. So here we go. We're going to look at this. If you come from classical music or the blues, then you're probably used to seeing this right here. And the way jazz guys change this stuff around to make it sound cool is you start with, here's your bass note. I'm going to lower it an octave down to this C. Here's my chord. I'm going to take this G off the top, put it down an octave lower. And now I'm going to take that E off the top. I'm going to put that down an octave lower. And now I've got something that's really actually in the comping range, right? Which is, comping is when you're supporting a right hand melody or a singer or a trumpet player, sax player, something like that. Now, this is a very harmonically boring chord to a jazz person. So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to add in a ninth here and drop the root. You don't really want to have the root there in this voicing part. You add in a 9, it's now called a C major with an add 2 or 9, and then you put in the A, which is the 13, right? And it's the 13 down an octave is a 6, and you end up with this chord, which is C6-9. But if you're seeing it on a page, it could just be written as a C, or it could be written as a C major 7, or it could be written as a C6 add 9. There's all these ways to do it. So what you really want to just know that the point of this is that in a position 1 chord in my system, the 3rd is the bottom note of the voicing. There's your bass note down here. And then that 3rd is indicating that it's position 1. So it goes 3, 5, 5, and then 6, 9. That gives your C major 6, 9. Okay, so that's a position 1 with a 3rd on the bottom. And then if you invert that up a couple of positions, nobody really uses this, which is the inversion in between. They're more likely to use this. And in this one, this is the excuse me, the position 2 chord. Position 2 is going to have a 6 on the bottom of the voicing. Here's your bass note. There's a 6, there's a 9, 3, and there's the 5. So a 6 or a 7 on the bottom means it's a position 2 chord. All right. Now to get to a position 3 chord, that's an interesting one because physically there's no way to play that all at once. Even Rachmaninoff probably couldn't reach all that. Although who knows, right? But if you got your bass note down here, you have to pedal that and then move your left hand up. Left hand, this is all left hand. And then you put the C, the G and the C on the top. So it's a 2-handed chord. Bass note is there. And then it takes 2 hands to do this. And if you take this chord and move it up, going up chromatically, where does that come from? Oh yeah, it comes from Bill Evans on Green Dolphin Street. Right. So another thing to remember about theory, notation, and all this intellectualization stuff that we do is that it's all after the fact. That's part of why it's so hard to standardize and explain all of these things that happen when music drops out of the sky or the universe into a human being, and then they just start doing stuff and they think about it later. So a lot of times the categorical explanations are that you have people that are innovators, and then you have the annotators and the explainers. So the music happens first, and then, people try and figure out what the heck happened. So I really doubt that McCoy Tyner sat down one day and said, well, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to play chordal harmony over a root and 5 and see what happens. I mean, it's just find a sound that you like, right? And this is it's chordal harmony force. And then you move that up. All right. And then years later, somebody comes along and says, well, yeah, that's simply these groups of math notes that are all moving over a root and 5, which is true. So we need everybody. We need the innovators, we need the annotators, and we need the explainers. So that's position 1, right? And position 2 and position 3, all out of my jazz chord voicing book. And this information is on page 5. If you actually physically have the book, page 5 is what we're looking at. Now, a really key important thing about using this material is you have to actually read the information. You know, so many people over the years have sent me emails about this, and they said, well, there's no way that I can do all of this, and it looks really awful and it's really hard, and how do I play it with the bass notes in there? So here's an idea, and I put this in the book too. Go find a bass player. If you're a solo pianist, you don't want to just sit in your house by yourself all the time and noodle around at the piano. I mean, it's fun up to a certain extent, but it doesn't really get fun until you involve other people. Solo piano is a very small portion of the jazz and piano community. I don't know, maybe 5% or 2%, something like that. But duos, trios, quartets, quintets, big bands, combos, all of that, it's huge. So if you're able to, go find yourself a bass player. I've been lucky. I had a great bass player in high school that I met through my music program. And then from there, I just was able to start working with some real monsters that played bass. You know, Marty Ruddy, who was from Boulder, Colorado, he did a lot of the work on my early records, including Soulscape. And once I got out to LA, then there were just tons of guys that were great, like Wilton Felder, who played bass on a lot of the Barry White and Michael Jackson and Motown stuff early. And after him, Alfonso Johnson from Weather Report was my bass player for quite a while. I had Dave Carpenter, rest in peace, Carp, one of the, you know, incredible virtuosos of the bass. So find yourself a bass player if you can. And then once you start thinking the bass is a separate thing from my chord voicings, which is a separate thing from my lead line, then everything starts to fall in place. Hopefully it'll start to fall in place for you, because if you don't have to do this and somebody else is doing this, or if they're walking the line, like, you know, a root of 5, one thing, which happens also later in the book, and it'll be another video, then you can take your left hand and you just put it up here. And your comping is now going to be what I like to call the sweet spot for comping. And, you know, jazz guys, you'll probably realize this over time, is that jazz guys, a lot of them are extremely bright and extremely lazy. So, you know, all of a sudden, at a certain point in jazz chord development, there just started being this kind of thing, you know, where people were moving these chords around, and you look at the videos and there's hardly any movement going on in the hand, but all the movement is going on in the brain, right? That's where it's happening. I mean, something like this, you know, this is, what am I playing? I'm playing Giant Steps. And all of these little voicings in here don't look right. And the root isn't involved at all. So I've even, like for this C69, I've even had bass players looking over my shoulder at certain bands that I was in, because I play in a lot of different kinds of genres, and looking at this chord voicing and saying, well, it's a C on the fake book chart, and you're playing an E minor chord. And yeah, I am, if you don't have the bass note in there. But some bass players will look over to your left hand and they'll think that the lowest note that you're playing is the root of the chord. And in jazz, that's pretty much not going to be true most of the time. So you want to separate that out. Now I've got my left hand here in this comping range, and the bottom note is the third again. That's position 1, as you see at the very first thing in the chord worksheet up there. And what happens is, when you start thinking about voice leading and the least amount of movement with the coolest amount of sound, then you're not going to have distances that are very far for your hand. Like, for example, here's a 2-5-1 in C. There's your root note. Over the top is the comping chord, F-A-C-E. Right? Now, to get to the G13 or the 5 chord from here, it's really easy if you just go from a position 1 to a position 2, because a position 2 has a 7 on the bottom. Here's the 5 chord. right? And the only thing that happened is this note here moved down a half step. So I made this leap of the 2 chord, the 5 chord, and physically I did the least amount of work possible. I moved one note half a step. And that's how jazz piano comping and jazz piano voicings work, because you're just doing the least amount of work, the most amount of thinking, and then you roadmap this stuff out and start practicing it and learning it. And that's why the book has so many chord progressions in it, and it goes through all the different keys. Now I'm going to make this a 2-5-1 now. All right, here's your 2, here's your 5, and here's your 1 chord. So without the bass player playing, it's going to be this. And you've got to be able to hear that bass note in your head. You can even play it up here, maybe arpeggiate the chord. D minor, G, and then C, 6-9. Even though the chord symbol is saying E until I put, something else up top. Maybe that. All right. So bass players are really essential. Now, this brings me to another point, which is in all the years I've been teaching, a lot of the students of mine have not been able to find a good bass player at their level. Maybe they don't have time, with all the things going on in their life, and they just want a really great band that they can work with in their house, in their spare time as a hobbyist. And I have the solution for that. I've done a play along series, and at this point it's probably about 50 tunes where I've gone into the studio with my trio and recorded a lot of jazz standards specifically for use by piano players. So what this means is that if you're using the iReal book, this is going to be at a higher level than iReal, because it's all done specifically for keyboard players. And I take solos on all these tunes, and you can study and analyze my solos. They're really fun. So the play-alongs are going to come along a little later when I have time to do that. But for now, the main things you want to remember about this is music theory is not an exact science, okay? Stuff happens. People discuss, they have councils, they argue about it. There's much laboring and committee meeting. And then something like Cordy comes along and just kind of consolidates and solves 90% of all of those problems, which I just think is really fantastic. I mean, I can sit down and play this now, and a student can see this. And remember, in harmonic spelling, that's another thing that's very important. That's when you have a note like this note here. That's an F sharp, but in my book, sometimes it's written as a G flat, because I say early on that in harmonic are 2 names for the same note. That kind of stuff happens a lot in jazz notation, because whatever is the fastest for the notator is going to be what the notator is going to use, whether it matches classical theory or not. And really, you need to be thinking about your sound and the sound of these chords more than you need to fixate on whether or not somebody used the correct spelling, because it's about the sound. That's what it's about. So let's look at a couple of these other things here. That's a beautiful chord. I love that. Let's see if Cordy gets this one right. Yes, it absolutely does. How about this one? A minor sub, flat 5. Yep, that's true. So, and you'll find this exact chord voicing in my book. I don't know what page it's on, but here you take the A out, and you have the 3 and the flat 5, flat 7, and the 9. And what do you know? That's got a 3 on the bottom of the voicing. So it is a position 1 chord, right? Now, if I invert that down to this, here's my bass note. Don't forget, your bass note is the foundation, but it's separate. And then here's the chord, A minor 9, flat 5. That's exactly right. If I take the B out, I get A minor 7, flat 5. And the reason that the 9 is in there is because jazz is harmonically very rich. The only other genre that's as rich as jazz is modern classical music. And so there you got it. Position 2, the 7's on the bottom. I'm going to play the position 1 and the 3's on the bottom. And if I expanded that out, I did it in the position 3 chords like this. Let's see, we've got this. Look at that huge, beautiful chord that's going on the top there, and the bottom. And there's that and that. And all these things could be moved around, and the more time that you spend with this information, the happier you're going to be, because every minute that you invest into your musical greatness and continue down your pathway to knowledge about music is never going to be wasted time. It'll always be time where you get back exactly what you put into it. And it doesn't work out always like that with human beings, but with music and with the piano, it always works out like that, because the piano is always going to be there. It's never going to argue with you, and it'll be your constant companion when things get frustrating. So back to this. Yes, my jazz piano voicings book. It's on Hal Leonard Publishing, and you can get it at planetmullins.com/book.htm. And as always, thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting my channel. I definitely need subscribers to keep this thing going. So please sub the channel. Enjoy the rest of your day. And don't forget, folks, never lose your sense of humor. I'll see you on the next one.